Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Pull, broadcasting from America's largest museum on international media and the news. Afghanistan, the world's leading producer of opium and heroin, has been notorious for its drug supply to Europe for decades. But in recent years, the excessive growth and production of these dangerous narcotics have led to an epidemic of drug addiction inside Afghanistan's own borders. But despite the growing problem, many Afghans don't understand the dangers of addiction or where to turn for help. Later tonight, we'll talk with an Imam who wrestled with his own drug addiction and is now counseling fellow Muslims on their own path to recovery. But first, I'm joined by Dr. Aziz, Associate Professor in the Clinical Psychology Department at Argosy University in Washington, D.C., and a member of the Afghanistan Mental Health Work Group at the U.S. Substance Abuse Mental Health Service Administration, and Thom Browne, the Deputy Director of the Office of Anti-Crime Programs in the U.S. State Department's Bureau for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thom, do we have a sense from the programs that the U.S. is assisting with Afghanistan, how many Afghans are addicted to heroin and poppy?
We don't have an exact number because surveys are very difficult due to stigma and getting access to women and children and households when conducting surveys. We do know that the surveys that exist are severely underestimated because we've been conducting some special testing, urine and hair testing of selected households. And so far, 61% of all children who we have tested positive for drug addiction.
61% of children have tested positive?
Yes, we've tested 30 children so far, over 30, and 61 have tested positive. Many of the children the women bring with them in the women and children's drug treatment programs that we sponsor.
Are these treatment programs mainly in Kabul?
The one for women and children are in Kabul, Balkh, and Herat provinces.
And what about amongst other segments of the population?
Okay, we have right now 18 substance abuse treatment programs that we sponsor, and 6 of them are for women and children, 3 for women with 3 add-on facilities for their children, and the other 12 programs are for men. They conduct residential treatment for men, and then the women have home-based treatment in those 12.
Do you know about how many are being treated in all these programs?
Okay, altogether we're treating about over 6,000 addicts per year.
Nahid, you know, this is astounding that so many people are addicted to drugs, and this is based on information on just some groups, and it must be much more than that. What about here in the United States? Like, how common is drug addiction here, and is there, you know, a social stigma associated with using drugs here?
Clearly, it's a devastating situation in Afghanistan, and overall, and globally speaking, it's about 240 million people suffering at some certain time from some kind of addiction, specifically opium as well as alcohol and so on. But in Afghanistan, as Thom mentioned, clearly it's very difficult to estimate the prevalence, what we will refer to, of drug addiction. However, there are some estimates that have shown that it's about almost 2 million people in Afghanistan are suffering from drug addiction, specifically opiates. And now we're hearing more and more Afghan women being also addicted, and children as young as 5 and 6 and 7.
In the U.S., people who abuse drugs, is there a social stigma associated with it here?
Absolutely, yes. And you know, the main, I guess, the classic stigma that goes along with it is taking responsibility, the failing one's own moral responsibility, which is clearly present cross-culturally, across whether it's in Afghanistan or the U.S. or anywhere else you go. And that is even more emphasized in Afghanistan because we are a very traditional society, and in many ways it's viewed as a personal, as an individual problem, and not rather as viewed from a medical perspective.
Thom, I want to go back to the use of, you know, opium for medicine, and some people in Afghanistan give it to their children because they think that it can help relieve their pain. How can we convince Afghans that these drugs can actually be very harmful to their children?
We find in certain provinces in Afghanistan, street theater works very well. You know, we have groups go out and they role play the dangers of drug abuse, and you'll have 2,000 or 3,000 people from a community show up, and that's a way to actually demonstrate and get across a message. Or a lot of people, they have radios that they listen to, so you gear the message towards the radio.
Is the U.S. supporting programs like that in Afghanistan?
Yes, we support drug prevention, drug treatment, public awareness programs.
Now, you know, as an Afghan professional who's working in this field here, what message would you share with Afghan mothers who are medicating their children with opium?
Well, my heart goes out to them, first of all. You need to understand that when Afghan women start using opiates, but also giving into their children, you have to really consider the psychological causes of that. It's not something that they have access to. Yes, of course, there is a lot of opium cultivated in Afghanistan, but just access is not the only single cause. You have to understand the much deeper level of psychological trauma that they have been exposed to for 30 years. A generation of maybe someone who is 30 years right now has not seen anything but violence.
Thom, I want to follow up on this ease of access issue. I mean, the street price for opium in Afghanistan is, I believe, $4 a gram. And do you think that that relatively low price compared to what it sells outside just gives people more access to the drug?
Well, you have access because you have over 90% of the world's opium supply there. So there's a lot of supply in the country. Traditionally, in some places, there's no access to medication. So opium is used as basic medication. You also have situations where the father may smoke in the home and the mother and the child don't. But because they live in an unventilated environment, they are absorbing the secondhand smoke and becoming addicted. Opium in breast milk is being passed on to kids. Sometimes children are used to score the opium poppy during the harvest time, and they're getting the opium gum on their hand, absorbing it cutaneously through their skin and licking it. So you have all these vectors
people are being
together.
Exposed, and they might not even understand or realize that
Yes.
they're becoming addicted to something. I mean, this issue of access, both within the country and then what happens when it's processed and exported out. I mean, there's also the issue that some people think that, oh, it was the returning refugees who brought this problem from refugee camps. Based on what the U.S. has been studying about this problem, what would you say to that?
No, returning refugees brought the injecting drug use problem. Before
Injecting
the refugees
with needles.
with needles. Mostly opium would be smoked, heroin would be smoked. But the returning refugees brought the injecting drug use, and with that you get the problem or the danger of HIV/AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases through through sharing needles. Okay, but opium addiction, heroin addiction has existed before. We're talking about trauma.
Right.
Now, when women come into treatment, you're suffering from two problems. You have a substance abuse addiction problem, and you also have trauma suffered from 30 years of war. And so you have to treat both the addiction and the trauma. If you treat one and not treat both, you're not going to solve either problem. So it makes substance abuse treatment more complicated.
More complicated. How to recognize the signs of drug addiction and where to turn for help when we return. Back with Nahid Aziz and Thom Browne. So first I want to turn to the signs of HIV/AIDS and the basic ways that HIV/AIDS can be transmitted between people. Can you explain that?
Exchange of needles. As you know, in Afghanistan, we are faced with extreme poverty, and those who are suffering from heroin addiction and so on, it's not uncommon that they share, frequently used same needle. So that's one way of transmitting HIV virus to each other. There's also the unprotected sexual contact.
And, what are some signs that if someone in an Afghan family, sees somebody maybe going through some physical symptoms, what are some that they can look out for drug addiction?
Well, short tempers, for example, would be one. Psychologically, there would be a personality change in many ways. A very nice, gentle, and calm person may turn into a very agitated person, maybe also very somehow in many cases violent person in the family. So the family, it's not uncommon that the family members will report back to the professionals that something happened to my mom or something happened to my dad. He's or she's no longer the same thing. And the last one is also the addiction to search to make sure that they engage in every aspect, every behavior to make sure that they feed their addiction. So they may lose home, they may lose their asset, they may lose any kind of belongings that they have to.
And Thom, can you tell our viewers a little bit more about what these treatment centers offer and how they could perhaps access them if someone in their family is suffering from an addiction?
Okay, first, to access the treatment centers, you could approach the Ministry of Counter Narcotics, the Ministry of Public Health, the provincial health authorities. We've educated a lot of the mullahs in Afghanistan because they are significant leaders in the country. We've done anti-drug seminars for them, so mullahs can refer people to addiction treatment programs because many people go to their local mullah. And then the mullahs have been trained by us, and they have a list of where substance abuse treatment programs are where they can refer people to.
Nahid, you specialize in mental health. Is there a connection between mental health issues and drug use?
100%. So yeah, it goes back to the classic example of chicken and egg, right? So which one was first? The same goes here. If an individual has some psychological vulnerability where he or she starts experiencing depressive symptoms or anxiety symptoms, and then so he or she may end up, if there are no other options and resources, ending up abusing drugs because of the availability. So, or if the individual has already a medical or biological predisposition where he or she is vulnerable and start becoming addicted easily, and then after that withdrawal effects can also create depressive symptoms and anxiety later on. So absolutely, they go hand in hand, they cannot be separated.
And touching on that connection between other problems, Thom, you know, in certain societies we see a connection between rises in drug addiction and also prostitution and burglary. Is that something that the anti-crime department at the State Department has seen in countries?
Well, yeah. Well, you've seen this relationship between drug use and criminal behavior. You know, criminal behavior that you do to be able to afford your drug habit. You know, on that, we've seen, yes, prostitutes. You know, places where we have worked worldwide. You know, some women will engage in prostitution to support the drug habit.
Do you have an example of a country who has dealt with this problem in the last 20 years successfully?
The government of Malaysia has been very successful in substance abuse treatment. In fact, we've taken some of the Afghans on study tours to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to study some of the Islamic treatment programs. And we set up a relationship between the NGOs in Malaysia and in Indonesia and Singapore with their counterparts in Afghanistan, where they culturally relate. The Islamic religion is a common denominator, you know, that helps build trust and to, you know, pass, you know, some helpful treatment techniques.
But how can Afghan families help each other, you know, when they're in these situations? Because some Afghan families tend to want to hide these problems from each other and not talk about it.
The best way, as Thom said, hopefully the connection with the community that they have, mullahs and religious leaders that they trust. And the best thing, in my view, is that we should really educate also the community leaders, tribal leaders and so on, to hopefully assume a non-biased, non-judgmental attitude so these people can come to them and also be helped, hopefully.
You know, as Dr. Aziz had said, this relates to the mental health issues. Does the U.S. intend to support counseling given all the post-traumatic
What we're doing
stress?
is treatment protocols for children that young have never been developed. The youngest we saw was in 1995 in Sao Paulo, Brazil, 7 to 8-year-old kids smoking crack cocaine. We developed drug treatment protocols for them back then. In Afghanistan, we're seeing them from 14 months to 6 years old with tremendous amount of drugs inside their systems. So we have to develop drug treatment protocols for children, which we're doing now with the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the United Nations, the World Health Organization. This has never been seen or attempted before. So it's the first time that we're doing this.
So I want to thank you both for your time, for coming and sharing your views and information about this serious problem for Afghanistan, as well as it's an international problem that affects other countries. Obviously the US has programs, there's treatment programs, but there's definitely more that's needed to be done to help the Afghan people.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Advice from an Imam counseling recovering Muslim addicts when we return. Joining me now is Imam Bilal Ali, a counselor who converted to Islam after overcoming his own drug addiction. His organization, Malata Islami, provides a recovery program to combat alcohol and drug addiction while reflecting Islamic principles. Thank you for joining us. Can you share with us your own journey into drug addiction? Like, how did it start and what did you go through?
Well, we refer to addiction as the fallen human condition, and my story is not unlike anyone else whose life has gone off on that miserable path. I like to really reflect on the conversion to Islam as having been the main remedy for my problems, and I think most people who have gone through the addiction that is tolerance, dependence, and then obsessive compulsive behavior that addiction brings with it. Their stories are pretty much nightmares, and mine was not unlike that.
You just mentioned that it was converting to Islam that helped you deal with your drug addiction?
Well, it did. It was part of the formula. However, and this is crucial, that one has to become clean and sober for some period of time for a true conversion, a reversion, as we say, revert to Islam can take place. So I had been clean prior to making my declaration of faith to Islam, but as I stayed sober and grew in my practice of Islam and knowledge and faith of Islam, then it was a twofold process of recovery and faith in Islam.
But how did Islam help guide you during that difficult period in your life? Very
simple answer to that question. In no uncertain terms does Almighty God, Allah, as we say, in the Quran, strictly and unequivocally forbid intoxicants. And that was the appeal for me. Having been raised as a Christian, sure, we were encouraged not to, consume intoxicants, but being exposed to Islam and the Quran, it was strictly forbidden. And for a guy like me, that was something that I needed. A very strict
measure. So you needed
measure.
the structure.
That's correct.
Here in the United States, you have many treatment programs for recovering addicts. There's something called the 12-step program. Yes. Can you tell our viewers just a little bit about how some of those programs work, and how does it relate to this program called Millat Islami that you're part of?
This is, I'm going into my 25th year of recovery. And around my third year, the 12 steps worked fine, but we, as recovering Muslims, sought to integrate our recovery, our 12-step recovery process along with our faith as Muslims. And so Millat Islami was founded by a very close companion of mine who has since returned to Allah in Baltimore, Maryland. And we're in our 20th anniversary year. After it was founded, it spread all over the United States and overseas as well, being successful at incorporating the 12-step principles. However, our 12 steps were Quranically based and Islamically based. So we changed the wording and a little bit to...
So if I understand this correctly, recovering addicts were the ones who helped to start really this program because they felt the need to have faith in this program that did work, but they felt something was missing?
Well, the founder was a recovering person, a recovering Muslim himself. I came in very early on and after meeting him and helped to promote it, and it just spread like wildfire.
What other elements of Islam are in the Millat Islami program that you think really help recovering addicts that our viewers in Afghanistan can learn from?
Well, to begin with, use of intoxicants is what is referred to as a major sin, kaba'ir, a major sin. And we're all humans, we all commit minor sins, hopefully. But for major sins, a process to absolve oneself of has to take place. This is referred to as sincere repentance, tawbah. Tawbah must be performed in order not to take a major sin like using heroin, alcohol, what have you, other major sins to your grave. And
so tawbah, which is in the Dari language, that you won't commit this sin again. You have to have that intent that you won't do it, and that has been a major part of this program?
For sure. That's you put it very very articulately.
And what are other things? Are there other elements of prayer or meditation?
Well, once we, actually the program is Al-Islam, the Arkanul Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam. Prayer, charity, fasting, Hajj, once in a life if you can afford it. That's the ultimate program. But those of us who had exhibited this weakness for drugs or alcohol, need special consideration to remember where we came from so that we don't relapse back to the sin. And that's where Milati Islami came in as a methodology to remind us so that we don't.
We spoke earlier with our guests about this problem of being able to share these issues with people in your family or community because people are afraid they will look down on them. You know, as a fellow Muslim, what would you share with people in Afghanistan that, you know, Islam can guide them in these areas and that rather than hiding it, that they should deal with it?
What I would share is that there is hope. There is hope for getting back to your faith. And Allah is the cure. And Milati Islami is just a means of getting back to the program, which is Al-Islam. And but again, we need the special help that detox and treatment facilities offer so that we get that initial phase of clean time from the substance. So that will allow us to get back to the practice of our daily prayers, our charity, our fasting. And before you know it, if you're sincere with this process, you'll 6 months, a year, 5 years, and time goes on. And then what you are acquainting yourself with just becoming a better Muslim, a Muslim with more iman and more taqwa.
And so obviously you need the help from medical professionals if you can get it, but that the faith can help keep you on the right path. You know, Milati Islami says that a person must be a slave to Allah, not a slave to mind-altering substances. But many Afghans, you know, they've suffered from so many years of war.
That's right.
And sometimes it can be hard for them to cope with their emotions on their own. What words of comfort could you share with your fellow brothers and sisters in Afghanistan, you know, as a closing, that they're watching this program and they may be considering using drugs, like you may have at one time? Right. What would you share with them?
See, the one important factor is that recovery takes place from salat to salat, prayer to prayer, on a daily basis. We are never really cured. It is like what is referred to in the Quran as disease of the heart. And so this is something that has to be ongoing, and that's why we say recovery, not recovered. So as long as someone commits theirself to the ongoing recovery process of practicing their faith, and then what is suggested through treatment and other therapy.
But perhaps maybe not to use these dangerous substances to begin with.
Well, that's prevention is worth a pound of cure. An ounce of prevention is certainly worth a pound of cure. That's the best advice, is to never use it in the first place.
Well, I want to thank you, Imam, for your time today and for sharing
welcome.
Your experience with our viewers and about this program that has helped many Muslim recovering addicts here in the United States. And I hope that it can help perhaps some of the programs that are addressing the issue in Afghanistan. Thank you.
That's what I pray. I pray if we can just help someone else. That's our objective.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
My thanks to Imam Bilal Ali, Nahid Aziz, and Thom Browne. We'd love to hear what you think about this or any other Pull program. Just go online to aamtv.tv or visit us at tolo.tv. See you next week for another edition of Pull.